Bri Seeley, I am jazzed that you're able to join us on the Yes Effect show. Thank you so much for spending the time and hanging out.
Thanks for having me, and thanks to, our friend Paul for connecting us.
Paul, yeah, our dear Paul. He always has good leads, and so when he was telling me about you and about your book and all the things that you're up to in the world, I wanted to reach out and make sure I had the opportunity to get you on and tell your story and stuff like that. So if we can segue right into that, if you wouldn't mind sharing with all of us how you went from where you started to the amazing human being you are now, who's changing lives and shaking things up and getting
Yeah,
results for people. Yeah.
totally. Well, it began on a Friday the 13th.
That's the best start to any story ever.
In May, I was born in a super, super, super small town in Minnesota. Was raised by a really kick-ass single mom who really showed me from a really young age that I could kind of do whatever I wanted. And I feel like being an only child growing up, my sister was born when I was 10. So the first 10 years of my life, I really got to experience what it was like to essentially manifest my reality. Because
What a great mom.
I know, like, it was just us. And so
Reading, writing, and manifesting.
and she didn't know she was doing it, and I didn't even know she was doing it until like a year ago. And I was like, no wonder I'm so good at this. When I was little, my mom would be like, what do you want for dinner? And I'd be like, I want scrambled egg sandwiches. And boom, we'd have scrambled egg sandwiches. Or what movie do you want to watch tonight? And I'd say, well, Cinderella. And boom, Cinderella would be on TV. And so I had a pretty cool childhood. There was a lot of trauma, a lot of stuff that I've never even talked about publicly that I'm sure at some point I will. But, on one hand, I had this really supportive, loving mom who would do anything in the world to protect me and encourage me and all this stuff. And on the other hand, my dad was a bipolar paranoid schizophrenic. And so I felt like I was almost living these two lives, and, all sorts of things happened and things unfolded. And I ended up following my journey to college, thought I wanted to be a fashion designer, ended up living in Italy for several years, studying fashion design, got back to the States, got a job as a costume designer, realized I hated it. And that was not what I wanted to do at all. The theater industry in general is very much like the starving artist thing. And I was like, that is not my lot in life. I am not meant to be a starving artist. So we're going to shift the trajectory a little bit. And I ended up getting a day job. And it was a day job that I loved my boss, but I hated what we did. And I never really cared about what we did, but I did it because it paid me. And it allowed me to become what I call an accidental entrepreneur. So as I was continuing to grow up, my mom started a daycare business when my sister was born. And then she transitioned into owning a candy store. And then she transitioned into another business. And I always watched what she went through, and I was like, I don't want to be an entrepreneur. I'm like, I see what she does. I see what she goes through, and I am good. I'm going to live the 9-to-5 life, and I'm going to be happy. And then I got into this job that I didn't like, and I was like, well, I studied fashion, so I'm just going to do this little fashion thing on the side to kind of like pacify my creative gene and like really still have a passion for something while I'm, just making a living. And little by little, year by year, the business just kept growing. And all of a sudden I was asking my bosses if I could work 4 10s instead of 5 8s so that I could have an extra full day to spend on my business. And then I was working 3 11s so that I could have another extra day to spend in my business. And I just kept essentially weaning myself off my job and increasing my business. Fast forward to 2012, I was entered into a fashion designer boot camp, and I won Designer of the Year at Phoenix Fashion Week, which catapulted me into selling on Zappos, which catapulted me into LA Fashion Week. And I was dressing people on The Bachelor and Toni Braxton and like all these things, right? And in the midst of all that, I moved to LA, which I feel like was my first purposeful move. All the other moves I had taken in the past were out of desperation to get away from whatever I didn't want.
So now you were going to something instead of going away from something.
Exactly. And so I got to LA. I fell in love with LA like we just talked about how awesome it is.
It's
And
amazing.
I just, I watch the sun stream through my windows. I'm sitting here. I love this city. And then about a year and a half, 2 years in, I started realizing that fashion wasn't what I wanted to be doing. The reason that I started doing fashion didn't exist anymore in my day-to-day. I did it out of a love for creating, out of a love for, bringing these beautiful things into the world, out of a love for the craft of it. I'd been sewing since I was like 4 or 5. And so, and then of course, studying in Italy, it's very different than say like the Forever 21s of the world.
Sure. Yes.
So, but I found that like no one wanted to touch my stuff because it was quote unquote too expensive, or that it was made too well, or it was quote unquote too fancy. And I was having all these issues with the market, and I wasn't having fun anymore. And I had told myself that when I stopped having fun, that I was out. So it was spring equinox 2015. I was meditating and was in this really deep, long meditation with this woman I know. And all of a sudden I got this really clear, what are you doing? Seriously, stop. Fashion is not it. It's not it. You need to walk away.
Did they give you a download of what it was? They told you what it wasn't.
They told me I got what it wasn't, but I didn't get anything other than that.
Okay.
So I walk away from this meditation and I'm like, oh, so here I am. And by the way, 2 days before the meditation, I had totaled my car. And that same day I totaled my car, I had just signed a $25,000 coaching contract with a coach.
Oh, wow.
I didn't have the proper income. I didn't if anyone that had looked at my life would have been like, you're crazy. You are absolutely, legitimately insane. What are you doing? And so I went from signing a $25,000 contract that I didn't know how I was going to pay, to totaling my car, to being in that meditation, learning I had to shut my business down. 3 days later, I announced online, I released my new collection. And the day after that, I announced I was closing my fashion brand.
Oh my goodness. So what was the reaction? People must have been going wild.
I don't know. I think I blocked a lot of it out because I was just so in the like, I know I'm doing this, but I don't understand why. And I'm just going to like rip the Band-Aid off and do it. I know my mom was upset because I forgot to tell her.
Oh, by the way,
it's a thing about my personality actually that I've learned, that I have to like be more conscious of communicating to other people outside of me. It's a bad habit. Anyways, so then I had all this space in my life. I'd cleared out all this space. I was getting rid of my business. I didn't have anything in front of me, ahead of me, other than this coaching contract that I had no idea how I was going to pay it. And little by little started realizing that women had been reaching out to me for like a year, asking me if I could help show them what I had done.
In terms of what?
Well, they didn't mean like building a fashion brand. They meant like bringing my vision to life. So I had this idea and I created it. And so I started realizing that the universe had been tapping me on the shoulder and being like, you really need to look at this. And I was like, I'm a fashion designer. This is what I do. This is who I am. Like, I'm good. And I had these blinders on. And
Labels are dangerous, right?
Yeah. So, by shedding that, I was able to be like, oh, there's all of these other things available to me. I started training my mom's employees when I was 5. And I was like, oh, I've been teaching people for three decades. Like, I have leadership skills. I have training skills. I have mentorship skills. I have 10 years of entrepreneurial experience. And so I started piecing things together and decided to start coaching people. And then the coaching kind of led into speaking, which then kind of led into entrepreneurship, and created some really amazing things in my business. I've been able to help a lot of really amazing women now create their visions. And so that's, as I've, because I'm like, okay, I'm a coach. Well, then what do I teach? What's my zone of genius? What's my sweet spot? What am I good at? And it really has come back to, and granted, it took me 2.5 years to get to this place, came right back around full circle to the emails I was getting about, will you help me create my vision? And so I've realized that that's really what I do. I help people take that intangible idea, that vision, that thought, that seed, and I help them really turn that into their living, breathing reality.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So how do you find that in terms of the rewardingness? Is that a word? In terms of, so, one of the things you were talking about is the craft and the creating. What does it feel like to know that you're basically crafting and creating a future for somebody? So it's not a dress, and it's not, a piece of clothing, but you're creating something for people that now has the ability to go out and create this ripple effect in the world.
I love that you mentioned the ripple effect, because that's totally how I see it. In fact, I had a session with one of my healers when I was writing my book, and she said, I just see you standing in this huge body of water and your feet are like in the mud. And she's like, I just see you like grounding and rooting, and you're like shifting your feet little by little and like getting deeper into the mud. And as you're connecting more and grounding more, you're creating this ripple effect outside of you.
I love that.
And that's totally how I see it. Like, I love working with moms because I know that I'm not just touching their lives, right? Like, they're going to take what they've learned from me and share it with their significant others and their children. I love working with other service providers because I know that information that I'm disseminating to them isn't stopping with them. It's going to continue out into the world. And one of my clients actually just launched her website today. And I got to open it up, and it's like the first almost like physical manifestation of her business. And it just makes my heart explode knowing, and she's a service provider, how much of an impact she is now going to be able to have in the lives of her clients. And then the kind of impact they're going to be able to have in their lives, whether or not they serve other clients or they have children or family members or whatever. It's like, I believe that every woman can inspire the world in some way, shape, or form. And I believe that we are at a time and a place in history where it is our responsibility to say yes to that. And I think it is a huge responsibility. And I think that we are the ones that are going to come in and heal a lot of the things that are really wrong with the world.
Absolutely.
And it is up to each and every one of us individually. I just saw some quote, I think it was from the Dalai Lama, talking about, how we see ourselves like, well, I'm only one person. How am I going to change the world? But it takes each of us individually saying yes to create that collective momentum to actually make an impact in the world. And that's, I see myself as a catalyst for helping create so much of that momentum.
You're like a midwife for people's dreams.
That's so funny. I am. Yeah. I'm like a doula, like an entrepreneurial doula.
Yeah.
Actually,
like a boss you are.
In that same healing session, she said, she's like, a doula just came into our healing session. She's like, that's weird. You can't get pregnant. Like, what is going on? And I was like, well, I'm basically birthing a book right now. Like, this is what's going on. So yeah, that's exactly what it is.
That's amazing. When you first realized that you were going to go in this direction, I hear this from so many people, that the thing they end up doing when it first comes to them, oftentimes they'll dismiss it because it's too easy and too obvious. Can you talk to that?
I mean, I think I dismissed it for that year before I shut down my fashion brand. Just because my ego was so wrapped up in being a fashion designer. It was unbelievable. I had to have like a massive ego death, like on the other side of shutting my fashion brand down, because my ego was pissed. It was like, but we're a fashion designer and we walk runways and like all the things. So it's interesting that when things come to me in meditative form, I don't question them. And so
me too.
The fact that I got that guidance, that's how my book came to me this year. I figured I'd write a book someday, but I never like sought out to write a book. And I was meditating in January and got this really clear, you're writing a book this year. And I was like,
oh, I guess I'm writing a book this year.
Okay, what am I writing about? So, usually for me, when stuff comes through meditation, I don't question it. I follow the breadcrumbs.
I love it. So I want to talk about your book. I want to talk about, how you did land on, going in the direction that you did and what the process was like for you and what you're doing with it as you move forward.
Yeah. So in January, when it came to me, then between January and about May is when my only job during that time was to open up space. So, well, I should back up. In the meditation, the whole message that I received was, you're writing a book this year and you're leaving Los Angeles for 2 weeks in June to write it. And I was like, all right. So I have between now and June to figure out all the things.
That's a lot of things.
And then I'll go in June and I'll go write the book. And then, of course, too, I was like, but where am I going? Which, of course, all came together perfectly. It was great. But I knew then my job between January and June was just to continually open up space. And so I was just in a continuous state of curiosity. I had my journal for the year, and I went towards the middle of the journal and put like a little ribbon. And that was where I would dump my book ideas. So if it was that I was reading an article that had like a passage in it that really lit me up, I would go into the journal and I would just write it down. Or if I were walking and I had this brilliant idea come to my mind, I would grab my journal out and I would write it down. And on Sundays, I would walk to the farmer's market. And on the way home, I would grab a cup of tea and sit down at the cafe and, write down the things that had inspired me that week, or where my thoughts were, or what was really, moving me or inspiring me or whatever. And I just kept brain dumping. And I just kept opening up the space for the inspiration to come, to flow through me, because I knew obviously like this book came to me. And so I just get to be the creative receptacle for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just about being in that receiving state and allowing the ideas to flow through me, and just kept writing and writing and writing and writing. And then I hired 2 guys to help me write the book, produce the book, finish the book, market the book, all those things. And my first session with them, we had like a 10-hour jam session where we just sat down and worked through my website and my offerings and my book and all this stuff. And I walked away from that session with an outline, a full outline for my book. So then when I left 2 weeks later to go to Seattle, I had the outline already, and I knew I had ideas about what personal stories would go in where. And I started doing research about like what, science and physics and different things I needed to add into different areas, and what tools I was going to be giving as resources for every single area. And then by the time I got to Seattle, it was just a matter of sitting down and, kind of getting into state so that the information could flow through me and doing it.
That's brilliant. I love that you did all the heavy lifting before, because, a lot of other authors will sit down to a blank page and look at it and think, okay, like I have so much to say, but it's so hard to get clarity on the overarching idea. And you can't be creative, or you can't be innovative on demand. So the fact that you had spent 5 months curating all of this, information and inspiration, and that's actually a really great way to do it.
It worked really well. And everyone's like, wait, you wrote like a 55,000 word book in 2 weeks? And I'm like, yeah, it's, I think because I did all that heavy lifting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also know myself well enough to know that sitting down for whatever reason, I'm a handwriter. I have notes sprinkled all over my settee next to me. And I'm a handwriter. That's what I do. So what I did was I took the outline and I spaced it all out. And so for each bullet point had like a page, and I printed it all out. So I had the whole outline, but with lots and lots of blank space. And then I would get my pen out, and I hand wrote almost my entire book.
I love that.
Take the handwritten pages and I would transcribe them into my laptop. And then from there, I would print that out so that I had my book printed. And then I would go back in and add in notes about like, oh, I need to remember to add this here. I need to, put this story here and flesh it out a little bit more. And then it was just a matter of sitting down and really massaging it into what it is today.
So the topic of your book is permission to leap.
Yes.
What can you tell us about the contents of the book?
So I remember taking my first conscious leap of faith or leap, whatever, when I was around 14. And I decided that I wanted to change my last name. And so I went to my mom and asked to change my last name. And, remember going through the whole process of first committing to that being what I wanted. And having to then show up in front of the courtroom and talk to the judge and like all these different things. And so I was looking back on that. I was looking back on my leaps of like going to college a year early and moving to Italy and moving to Olympia, where I had never been before, to take a job, and moving to LA and starting a business, and all these leaps that I'd taken. And I started really seeing a common progression of what happens from the moment that you commit to this vision of yours, all the way through to the moment when it's executed and you're like in the feedback loop of maintaining that leap, right? So I realized that there's a lot of books out there that are like, just go out and do it and say yes and figure it out later and, move through all the resistance, but then no one actually talks about what it looks like. Like,
right.
What are you actually going to go through? The mental stuff, because that's 90% of it.
Yeah. And that's where people get stuck too.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to break it down. I'm going to break it down. When you say yes to your leap, here are all the things that are going to happen. Here's, the gremlins you're going to face inside, your inner naysayer, and how to deal with that voice. And when the universe provides you the double check moment of like, are you really sure that this is what you want? And then what happens when you're in the free fall, like you've jumped out of the airplane and now you're like in the leap and the wind is rushing past your face and you're freaking out, like all the things that go into this leap process of taking this intangibility that you can't see or touch and turning it into your everyday reality. And 80% of it is an inner game thing. It's all about your mindset, your feelings, your, using visualization, getting clarity, all this stuff. And so I just kind of wanted to open the treasure chest of like, people aren't really talking about this. They're not really telling you what it is actually like on the ground to create these things. And I'm just going to give the entire behind the scenes look at it, because hopefully if people can see and understand what it really takes to say yes to your vision, I think more people would do it.
I love that you've created this, because oftentimes people will look at the thing they want to do and immediately think of 100 reasons why they can't. And instead of people would stop leading with logic and lead with possibility, it allows the universe to open the door and give you those coincidences that aren't coincidences, and those serendipitous moments. And when you say yes without knowing all the reasons or all the hows or the whys or whatever, when you say yes and you just jump, then all of a sudden, you take a couple steps. And when you take a few steps, you're now in a vantage point where you can see something you couldn't see 2 steps ago. But had you not taken those steps, you wouldn't have that new point of view. Yeah. And I love that you broke it down so that it validates what people are going through, because that is really the thing that hangs people up. And if people were able to look at somebody who's in the position that they want to be in and have that person, like we were talking about earlier, just lift the hood and say, listen, guys, you can do this. Here's what you can expect. And here's what it's going to look like. Man, that moves the needle for everybody.
Yeah. And I'm really transparent about it too, because it's not a seamless process and it's not an easy process. Like there still, even this past month, I had to call and ask for rent money from a friend. Like there are still bumps. There are still obstacles. There are still barriers. And it's less about that stuff and more about your vision, your tenacity, your dedication, your ability to go do uncomfortable things to like really make your vision bigger than you. I feel like a lot of times what stops us is us. Like we just get in our way. And we are just, like I said earlier, vessels for the universe to express itself. And so it's our job to get out of our own way so that the universe can really fill us up and create all that magic out there, create the opportunities, create the just brilliance that is meant to shine through each and every one of us every day. And yeah, my hope is really to help more people do that. And so far, I've gotten a lot of really great feedback that there are a lot of people who are doing a lot of things in the world right now that they wouldn't have otherwise done because they read the book. And so my vision for it is to go pretty far and wide. Like I think it's good. I think it's unique. And I think it's really helpful. It's really tangible. There's a lot of just tools and things that people can take and implement now to actually move the needle forward in their lives.
Well, I love that you've taken something, and I call it roots and wings. So your roots being your practical, tactical, like get it done, logical brain, and then your wings being sort of your creative and your visionary and stuff. And I love that you've combined both of them so that you've taken something that's intangible, like your dream or your idea, and you break it down into practical, tactical steps. Because that kind of is the only way to get it done. You first have to dream. You have to set your intention. You have to know what that thing is that you're going to chase. But then you need to like figure it out. Like there are logical steps that need to be taken, but you can't lead with logic. You have to lead with possibility.
Yeah, I call it the spiritual world and then the physical world, right? So in the spiritual world, that's where the vision comes in, the visualization, the feelings, like all the spiritual kind of like woo stuff, right? That you can't see. And then the physical world is all the like this stuff that we can touch, right? Like taking action, doing those things. And it starts in the spiritual world because you can't see your vision. It just exists within you. And so you have to have that relationship with yourself, with the spiritual part, the wings, the woo, the whatever, to cultivate that. And then you have to combine it with the physical world. Otherwise, if it's just an idea, if it's just existing within you, then it will never be a physical, tangible reality. My friend Libby also calls it part swagger and part soul.
I love that.
So
that'd be a great book title too.
Yep.
That's amazing. Well, I appreciate you, and I love that you have created this because so many people need it. And, this is going to make a difference for so many people in what becomes possible for them, and then subsequently what becomes possible through them following their truths as well. So I appreciate you. If people are looking for your book, where's the best place to either buy it or to reach out to you online?
You can find the book on Amazon. It's called Permission to Leap. If you want to get in contact with me, my website, my Twitter, my Facebook, my Instagram, everything's under Bri Seeley.
Amazing. You're awesome, and I appreciate you. Thank you so much for spending the time.
Thank you.